Winter's beauty often masks its hidden dangers, a serene snowfall hiding chilling secrets. These are 3 true stories of winter encounters that will send shivers down your spine. From eerie strangers to unexplained phenomena, these tales might make you think twice before venturing into the snow alone. Our family's little vacation home in Colorado is more than just a house. It's a treasure chest of memories. For over 40 years, it has stood proudly amidst the snow-covered peaks and sprawling forest, a beacon of warmth and simplicity in the heart of winter's chill. My parents, both passionate skiers, had purchased the home long before I was born. To them, it was a dream come true, a cozy retreat where they could escape the bustle of everyday life and embrace the serenity of the mountains. Though it was showing its age, with creaky wooden floors and faded paint, the house had a certain charm that made it feel timeless. My dad had poured countless hours into its upkeep, fixing everything from leaky pipes to the aging roof. It was a labor of love, and despite its imperfections, the house remained a sanctuary for our family. 15 years ago, when I was just 8 years old and my brother Josh was 11, we embarked on one of our many winter getaways to the Colorado cabin. The snowstorm that greeted us upon arrival was nothing short of magical. Thick, fluffy flakes fell from the sky, blanketing the world in white. It was the kind of snowfall that made everything feel quiet and still, as if the entire world had paused to admire its beauty. For Josh and me, the snowstorm was an invitation to adventure. Our property was vast, with a sprawling backyard that opened into a massive clearing surrounded by dense woods. The trees, their branches bare and frosted with snow, stood like silent sentinels guarding the edge of our little world. A quiet road wound its way downhill, leading to a handful of neighboring properties, each as secluded as ours. It was the perfect setting for 2 imaginative kids to lose themselves in games and exploration. The highlight of that day was our favorite winter game, Snowball Fort Battles. The rules were simple yet thrilling. Each of us would build a fort, complete with walls and defenses, and hide a jewel, a giant snowball, in its center. The objective was to steal the other person's jewel and bring it back to your own fort without getting caught. It was a game that combined strategy, stealth, and just the right amount of chaos. Josh, always the more adventurous of the 2 of us, decided to set up his fort on the neighboring property. This wasn't unusual. The house next door was almost always vacant, and its expansive yard made it an irresistible extension of our playground. The house itself was a large, imposing structure with an old-fashioned design that gave it a slightly eerie vibe. Its tall windows and steeply pitched roof made it look like something out of a storybook, or a ghost story. As Josh ran off to claim his territory, I stayed behind to build my fort. I worked diligently, shaping the snow into sturdy walls and crafting the perfect jewel. The cold didn't bother me. I was bundled up in layers of winter gear, my cheeks flushed from the effort. The only sounds were the crunch of snow beneath my boots and the distant whistle of the wind. Josh had promised to blow a whistle once his fort was ready, signaling the start of the game. I waited patiently, my excitement growing with each passing minute. But as the minutes turned into 10, I began to feel a twinge of unease. Josh was quick and efficient. He should have been ready by now. Deciding that something must have delayed him, I debated whether to take the shortcut through the woods or follow the road to the neighboring property. The woods, with their gnarled branches and shadowy depths, felt intimidating under the heavy snowfall. The road, though longer, seemed safer. I chose the road, my boots sinking into the fresh snow as I trudged forward. The journey to the neighboring property felt longer than it should have. The snow was deep, and each step required effort. The wind swirled around me, carrying with it a faint, haunting whisper that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Despite the layers of clothing, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. When I finally reached the property, I was greeted by an unsettling sight. Josh's fort was there, perfectly constructed, but he was nowhere to be seen. The clearing was silent, the snow untouched except for a single set of footprints leading toward the house. My heart began to race as I called out his name. "Josh!" My voice echoed through the stillness, but there was no response. Hesitantly, I approached his fort, scanning the area for any sign of him. The footprints in the snow were fresh and unmistakable. They belonged to Josh. They led straight to the front steps of the house, stopping abruptly at the door. Before I could investigate further, a voice called out from the house. "Excuse me, are you looking for your brother?" Startled, I turned toward the sound. Standing on the front steps was a woman. She was older, with graying hair and a knitted shawl draped over her shoulders. Her smile was wide, almost too wide, and her eyes seemed to glint with something I couldn't quite place. "Yes," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "We're playing a game." Her smile didn't waver as she gestured toward the door. "Your brother isn't here," she said, her tone calm but unsettling. Confused, I pointed to the footprints in the snow. "But he was here," I insisted. The woman didn't respond. Instead, she took a step closer, her hand outstretched. "Why don't you come inside? It's so cold out here," she said, her voice soft but insistent. Something about her demeanor sent a wave of fear through me. Her smile, which had seemed warm at first, now felt menacing. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to run. As I stood frozen in place, I noticed movement in one of the upstairs windows. A figure stood partially obscured behind the glass, their face hidden by what looked like a black beanie. For a split second, I thought it might be Josh, but the outline didn't match. The figure disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me with a sinking feeling in my stomach. Summoning all my courage, I called out Josh's name as loudly as I could. "Josh!" The woman's smile faltered for the first time. Her expression darkened, and her eyes narrowed. From inside the house, I heard heavy footsteps descending the stairs, each step echoing ominously. Panic set in. Without thinking, I turned and ran, my boots slipping on the icy ground. Behind me, I heard the woman shout something, but her words were lost in the wind. I didn't dare look back. The journey back to our property was a blur. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were made of lead, but I didn't stop until I reached the safety of our driveway. There, I saw my dad and Josh waiting for me. Relief washed over me as I collapsed into the snow, gasping for breath. Josh looked shaken, his face pale. Before I could explain what had happened, he blurted out that someone at the neighbor's house had tried to get him to come inside. His words sent a fresh wave of fear through me. Hearing this, my dad's expression darkened. He grabbed a heavy tool from the garage and headed down the road to investigate. Meanwhile, my mom ushered Josh and me inside, locking the doors behind us. When my dad returned, he told us the house was locked and no one had answered the door. He'd gone to another neighbor's house to ask about the property owners and learned they weren't in town that weekend. The house was supposed to be empty. The police were called, and my brother and I had to describe the woman to the officers. They searched the house and found the back door unlocked, but no one was inside. The whole experience left our family deeply unsettled. After that day, we never played near the neighbor's property again. Even now, thinking about that woman's smile and the shadowy figure in the window sends a shiver down my spine. If this story gave you chills, make sure to like and share this video. Let your friends experience the eerie suspense of winter's hidden horrors. A few winters ago, during my senior year of college, my friends and I planned what we thought would be an unforgettable ski trip to Vermont. It was the kind of getaway we'd been talking about for months. A weekend of adrenaline, camaraderie, and, of course, plenty of stories to bring back to campus. Vermont ski resorts are legendary in the Northeast, and we were determined to make the most of every moment. Our group of 4 was as mismatched as it was inseparable. There was Ryland, the thrill seeker, who lived for the steepest slopes and the riskiest runs. Then there was Amir, our resident clown, whose jokes and antics kept us laughing even when we were too tired to stand. Jaden, the planner, was the glue that held us together, his meticulous nature ensuring that we never lost track of time or each other. And then there was me, the quiet observer, content to go along with whatever the group decided, while quietly soaking in the experience. We arrived at the resort on a Friday evening, the mountain looming ahead of us like a giant covered in a thick blanket of snow. From the moment we stepped onto the slopes the next morning, it felt like we were in a different world. The air was crisp and cold, the kind that stung your cheeks but left you feeling alive. The snow was perfect, soft enough to glide over, but firm enough to hold an edge. The first day was everything we'd hoped for and more. We tackled run after run, from wide, gentle trails to narrow, twisting glades that tested our skills. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the mountain in a golden glow, we were exhausted but exhilarated. We spent the evening recounting our adventures over steaming mugs of hot chocolate, already planning which trails we'd hit the next day. The second day started off much like the first. We were up early, eager to make the most of the time we had left. The mountain was massive, with trails that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. By midday, we'd found our groove, splitting off into smaller groups to explore different parts of the resort before regrouping at the lifts. As the afternoon wore on, the crowds began to thin. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the snow. It was during one of these quieter moments, as we stood at the top of a lift, debating which trail to take next, that 2 women approached us. They appeared out of nowhere, their presence as unexpected as it was intriguing. Both were dressed in sleek ski gear, their helmets tucked under their arms. One was a brunette with dark, flowing hair and an easy smile. The other was a blonde with piercing blue eyes that seemed to gleam in the fading light. "Hey," the brunette said, her voice warm and friendly. "Mind if we join you guys?" We exchanged glances, unsure what to make of their sudden appearance. Ryland, ever the outgoing one, was the first to respond. "Sure, the more the merrier." The women introduced themselves as Taylor and Devon. They explained that they were visiting the mountain for the weekend but had been struggling to find people their own age to ski with. "It's mostly families and older folks," Taylor said with a laugh. "We were starting to think we'd made a mistake coming here." Their friendliness was disarming, and it wasn't long before we were chatting like old friends. They asked about our favorite trails, our skiing experience, and even where we were staying. Devon seemed particularly interested in Amir and Ryland's equipment, asking detailed questions about their skis and boots. At the time, it seemed like harmless curiosity, but looking back, it was the first of many subtle red flags. As the conversation progressed, Taylor noticed the flask of Fireball that Amir had been carrying. "Fireball, huh?" she said with a teasing grin. "That's cute." Amir, never one to back down from a challenge, raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? What do you drink?" Without missing a beat, Devon reached into her jacket and pulled out a small unmarked bottle. "This," she said, holding it up like a prize. "You guys should try it. It'll put that fireball to shame." The bottle immediately caught my attention. It was small and dark, with no label or markings of any kind. Something about it made me uneasy, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. My friends, however, didn't share my hesitation. Ryland was the first to take a swig, followed quickly by Amir. They laughed as they passed the bottle back and forth, each daring the other to take a bigger sip. When it reached Jaden, he hesitated. "I'm good," he said, holding up his hands. Devon's smile faltered for a moment, replaced by a look that was almost annoyed, but just as quickly, her warm demeanor returned. "Come on," she said, her tone playful but insistent. "Just a sip. It's tradition." Reluctantly, Jaden took a small sip before passing the bottle to me. I lifted it to my lips but didn't drink, pretending to take a swig before handing it back. If Devon noticed, she didn't say anything. As the sun dipped lower, casting the mountain in shades of pink and orange, Devon brought up a trail called Devil's Forest. She described it as a hidden gem, an unmarked glade that few people knew about. "It's the best trail on the mountain," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Jaden frowned. "I've been studying the trail map, and I don't remember seeing anything called Devil's Forest." Taylor shrugged. "That's because it's not on the map. It's kind of a locals-only thing." The idea of an off-map trail intrigued Ryland and Amir, who were always up for an adventure. Jaden and I exchanged uneasy glances, but ultimately decided to follow the group. After all, what's the worst that could happen? Devon and Taylor led the way, taking us down a series of increasingly narrow trails. The further we went, the fewer skiers we saw, until it felt like we were the only ones left on the mountain. The trees grew denser, their snow-laden branches forming a canopy overhead that blocked out what little sunlight remained. Eventually, we reached a point where the girls told us to unclip our skis. "We have to hike a bit to get to the entrance," Taylor explained. The hike was short but grueling. The snow was deep, and the cold seemed to seep into my bones despite my layers. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were heading somewhere we weren't supposed to be. When we finally reached the trail, it was nothing like I expected. The slope was steep, the trees tightly packed, and the path barely visible beneath the untouched snow. "This is it," Devon said, a hint of excitement in her voice. Amir and Ryland didn't hesitate. They clipped their skis back on and took off down the slope, laughing as they disappeared into the trees. Jaden and I lingered at the top, our unease growing. "You sure this is safe?" Jaden asked, his voice low. Taylor rolled her eyes. "Of course it is. Stop worrying so much." Reluctantly, we followed. The sound of our skis cutting through the snow, the only thing breaking the silence. The trail was challenging, requiring sharp turns and quick reflexes to navigate the dense forest. At the bottom of the slope, we regrouped, but something was wrong. Amir and Rylan were acting strange, their movements sluggish and uncoordinated. Before I could ask what was wrong, Amir collapsed into the snow, followed moments later by Ryland. Panic set in as Jaden and I tried to wake them, but they were unresponsive. Taylor and Devon stood nearby, their expressions unreadable. "What did you give them?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Devon shrugged. "Nothing they didn't want." Before I could respond, Jaden suddenly stumbled and fell. My heart raced as I realized I might be next. Despite the dizziness creeping over me, I managed to stay conscious, watching as the girls calmly gathered our friend's skis and began walking away. What happened next was a blur. Somehow I found the strength to follow them, staying hidden as they made their way to a clearing where a van was waiting. 4 men emerged, their faces shadowed in the fading light. One of them pointed in my direction, and that was all it took for me to retreat, running back to where my friends lay in the snow. When Amir and Rylan finally woke, we made our way back to the main part of the mountain and reported the incident to the authorities. But the girls and their accomplices were never found. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't pretended to drink from that bottle. What do you think the girls were planning? Leave a comment below with your theories. Your input might help us piece together this disturbing puzzle. Every winter, my friends Kyle, Ricky, and I have a strange little tradition. We drive out to a frozen lake a few towns over, bundle up against the cold, and just walk across the ice. It might sound mundane or even odd to some people, but for us, it's more than just a winter ritual. It's an escape. There's something magical about standing in the middle of a frozen lake, surrounded by silence. The snow absorbs every sound, and the world feels eerily still. It's a kind of quiet you don't experience anywhere else, a silence so profound it feels otherworldly. When you're out there, it's like you've stepped into another dimension, a place untouched by time or civilization. We've been doing this for years, ever since we were teenagers. It started as a simple dare. Kyle had joked about walking out onto the lake one snowy night, and Ricky and I had called his bluff. But what began as a test of courage quickly became something we genuinely looked forward to every winter. This past winter, however, was different. It was a night that left us with more questions than answers. A night that turned our peaceful tradition into something that still haunts me to this day. It was early January, just after the holiday season. Snow had been falling steadily for weeks, blanketing the town in white and freezing every surface solid. The lake, which we affectionately called Ice Mirror because of the way it reflected the moonlight, was completely frozen over. The weather had been consistently below freezing for days, so we were confident the ice was thick enough to hold our weight. That night, the snow was coming down heavily, the flakes swirling in the air like tiny crystals. The three of us piled into Kyle's truck, the heater blasting as we made our way to the lake. Kyle was driving as usual. His pickup was the only vehicle that could handle the snow-covered back roads. Ricky sat in the passenger seat, fiddling with the radio, while I sat in the back, staring out the window at the snowy landscape. It was late, probably close to midnight, but that was part of the charm. The lake was always deserted at that hour, and the darkness only added to the atmosphere. The moon was full that night, casting a pale silver light over the snow. Even with the heavy snowfall, the world wasn't completely dark. The snow reflected the moonlight, creating a surreal glow that made it feel like we were walking through a dream. When we arrived, Kyle parked the truck in the small lot near the edge of the woods that surrounded the lake. The forest wasn't dense, more like a scattered collection of trees, but it was enough to obscure the lake from the road. We grabbed our gear, flashlights, gloves, and scarves, and started the short walk through the trees to the water's edge. The cold hit us as soon as we stepped out of the truck. It wasn't just cold, it was bone-chilling, the kind of cold that cuts through layers of clothing and settles in your bones. Ricky lit a cigarette, the glow of the lighter briefly illuminating his face, and exhaled a stream of smoke that mingled with the frosty air. "Man, it's cold," he muttered, pulling his scarf up over his nose. "That's the point," Kyle replied with a grin. "The colder, the better. It makes the ice stronger." I didn't say anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something about that night felt different. Maybe it was the way the snow muffled every sound, or the way the trees seemed to loom over us as we walked. Or maybe it was just my imagination. When we reached the lake, it was as beautiful as ever. The snow-covered ice stretched out before us, a vast, unbroken expanse that seemed to go on forever. The moonlight reflected off the surface, giving it an almost ethereal glow. Kyle picked up a small rock from the shore and tossed it onto the ice. It skidded across the surface, the sound sharp and clear in the silence. "Looks solid," he said, stepping onto the ice with confidence. Ricky and I followed, our boots crunching against the thin layer of snow that covered the ice. We walked slowly at first, testing the surface with each step, but it held firm. Before long, we were making our way toward the center of the lake, laughing and joking as we went. We had only been out there for a few minutes when something caught Ricky's attention. "Hey," he said, his voice low. "What's that?" We stopped in our tracks, turning to see what he was pointing at. On the far side of the lake, near the edge where the trees met the ice, a dark figure was moving. At first, I thought it was an animal, a bear, maybe, but as I squinted through the falling snow, I realized it was too large and upright to be an animal. "It's a person," Kyle said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. The figure was hunched over, moving slowly and deliberately toward the center of the lake. It was dragging something behind it, a long, dark object that left a faint trail in the snow. "What the hell are they doing out here?" Ricky asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We stood there, frozen in place, watching as the figure moved closer. The snow made it hard to see details, but something about the way it moved didn't feel right. It was almost unnatural, like it was struggling to maintain its balance. As it reached the middle of the lake, the figure stopped and straightened up. For the first time, we could see it clearly, or at least as clearly as the snowfall allowed. It was wearing some kind of suit, fur-covered and bulky, with a hood that obscured its face. At first, I thought it might be a costume, but the way it hung from the figure's body made it look more like a disguise. "What is that?" Ricky whispered, his voice trembling. Before any of us could answer, the figure knelt down and began doing something to the ice. At first, I couldn't tell what it was doing, but then I realized it was hitting the ice with something. A rock, maybe, or a heavy tool. The sound echoed across the lake, a dull, rhythmic thud that sent shivers down my spine. "We should go," I said, my voice barely audible. Kyle didn't respond. He was staring at the figure, his expression unreadable. Ricky looked like he wanted to run, but his feet were rooted to the spot. Then, as if sensing our presence, the figure stopped and turned to look in our direction. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its gaze, cold and piercing, cutting through the darkness. "Hey!" it shouted, its voice deep and rough. That was all it took to break the spell. We turned and ran, our boots slipping on the ice as we scrambled back toward the shore. The sound of our footsteps echoed in the silence, each step feeling impossibly loud. When we finally reached the truck, we piled in and slammed the doors shut, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. Kyle started the engine, and we sped away without looking back. What do you think the figure was doing on the ice? Was it just a strange coincidence, or something more sinister? Leave a comment below with your thoughts. And don't forget to share this story with your friends who love a good mystery.